Chapter 21 of The Alps, the Danube, and the Near East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Betty B. The Kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Let us jump into a car and drive through the country near Belgrade to the top of Mount Avala. Some people would call it a hill, but it rises perhaps 1,000 feet over the plains, and it will give us a view of a region like most of the land between here and the mountains. We bump over the rough roads, passing long-horned white cattle and fat sheep and hogs, and ride through little farms where men and women are working. Entering a pine wood, we go, in second, round and round up the steep slopes of Mount Avala, till we come out into the open beside a great stone cross surmounting a pyramid of granite. This is the memorial of the people to the unknown dead of the World War. While the pine trees whisper a requiem, we sit down by the monument and look out over the country. The view embraces many miles, with a mountain here and there in the distance. There are signs of earth washing, and the whole region reminds me of the Piedmont section of the Carolinas. The land is gently rolling. It is all hill and hollow, but the hills are covered with woods, and the green patches of grass run in and out between thousands of small sheets of yellow wheat, rye, barley, and oats, and fields of green corn. Here and there is a village, its specks of houses shining white dots in the orchards about them. That streak of silver off to the west is the Save River. It is navigable for a long distance and flows into the Danube at Belgrade. How small the fields are! Many of them are not more than 1 or 2 acres. There are no great estates in this part of the country. Old Serbia, on which we are looking, was a great peasant democracy, made up of small landholders, each of whom owned his farm. In some sections, 9 out of every 10 men have some land. As a result, the tracts are so small that but little farm machinery is used. On our way to the mountain, we saw men cradling the grain and women binding it by hand. The plows were rude and the draft animals were oxen. It is different in the lands taken from Austria-Hungary, which were held largely by the rich and the nobles. In those sections of what is now Yugoslavia, hardly a third of the people owned enough land to maintain a family. They worked for the rich farmers by the day or became tenants, cultivating the soil for a third or fourth of the produce raised. These great tracts have been taken over by the government and are being subdivided under the land reform laws. They are in excellent condition, and many of them have been farmed with tractors and the most up-to-date machinery. It remains to be seen whether they will yield as much in the hands of small farmers. But to understand this kingdom made of pieces of old Austria and Hungary added to Serbia and Montenegro, you must know something of the peoples that inhabit it. Their ancestors lived on the northern slope of the Carpathian Mountains, between the Black and Caspian Seas. A little after the birth of Mohammed, and while his followers were taking Jerusalem and Constantinople, these Carpathian tribes established themselves in the valley of the Danube. The newcomers were of the great Slavic family to which the Russians, the Poles, the Czechs, and the Bulgarians belong. The name Yugoslavia means land of the South Slavs, and most of its 12 million people are Slavs. About 40% are Serbs, 30% are Croats, and perhaps 10% are Slovenes. The rest of the population is made up of Magyars, Germans, Romanians, Albanians, and others. In the early migrations, the Serbs settled between the Danube and the Drina. When the great Turkish invasion swept over the land, the Serbs were conquered and had to submit to the rule of the Moslems for more than 400 years. Yet all this time they kept their traditions. They fought against their masters again and again, so that when the Turks were finally driven back, the Serbs had developed the sturdy, indomitable character that makes them the strongest element in the new nation. They have stuck to their own language, still using the Greek characters common in Russia. They belong to the Greek Orthodox Church and have many of the traits of the Russians. The Slovenes and the Croats drifted northward and westward. They made their way up to the borders of Austria and Hungary and spread out over much of the land to the south along the Adriatic Sea. Thus they came under the influence of the Austrians and the Hungarians. Most of them were converted to Roman Catholicism, the faith to which they still belong. They were affected by the civilization of the West rather than that of the East, and adopted the Latin alphabet. In the New Kingdom, a number of the papers are printed in both Latin and Greek letters, the words being the same. This is also true of the official record of the new Parliament and of many of the public documents. These two streams of culture do not mingle well. The Serbs think more like the Russians, while the Croats and the Slovenes, although they are cousins to the Serbs, think more like the Latins. The Croats and the Slovenes rather despise the Serbs for their roughness, and the Serbs look on the others as weaklings on the way to degeneration. The Croats and the Slovenes are afraid of the domination of the Serbs. They would like to have states' rights and maintain only a rather loose allegiance to the nation, except in case of war and a few other international matters. The Serbs believe in spelling the word nation with a big N, and in the centralization of power. Under the leadership of Nikola Pasic, their grand old man, the Serbs gained the ascendancy, and they seem likely to make the country a constitutional monarchy as democratic as England. Radic, the leader of the Croats, is a demagogue and troublemaker who reminds me somewhat of Blue Jeans Williams, Sockless Simpson, and others of our pothouse politicians. Radic is educated and a writer of poetry, but he so plays on the feelings of the Croatian peasants that he has their 70 members of parliament in the hollow of his hand. He told the peasants if they voted his way, they would be obliged neither to pay taxes nor to go to war, and that his election would bring the millennium. He has a considerable following among the educated Croats and Slovenes, who feel as he does, although they do not approve of his demagoguery. I have found the Parliament of Yugoslavia more interesting than were any of the other congresses I have recently visited. It has but one house, known as the Narodna Skupština, or National Assembly, which contains 313 members. The king summons it and has the right to dissolve it. Elections are held every 4 years. Besides the Radical Party now in power, the Assembly has representatives of the Socialists, the Croatian Agrarian Party, the Serb Agrarians, the Mohammedans, the Catholic People's Party, and other political organizations. The number of parties gives a hint of the somewhat unsettled condition of the country. I visited the National Assembly and watched it at work. It was a polyglot crowd. There were perhaps 200 members present, dressed in all sorts of costumes. Many of them wore the peasant's homespun. Others had on the clothes of the Western businessman and looked not unlike our congressmen in Washington. There were perhaps a dozen Greek Orthodox priests in their long gown-like coats. The Mohammedan members had red fezzes on their heads and looked just like Turks. I saw one with a green turban, the sign that he had been to Mecca. The tall Montenegrins wore blue jackets and baggy trousers. The speaker sat high above the members, with a portrait of the king behind him and an oriental rug over his desk, while below at the right and left sat the cabinet ministers. I was especially interested in the voting. According to Yugoslavia's law, this is done by secret ballot on every bill. As the clerk called the roll, each member dropped his ballot in a box. Afterward, the boxes were carried to the clerk's desk, where the ballots were taken out and counted. One representative of each of the political parties, making almost a dozen men in all, came up and watched the tellers to see that there was no cheating. When the vote was declared, there was great applause. The speeches I heard were in the Serbian language, and the speakers shouted and tore the air just as they do in democratic assemblies everywhere. One of the bills the members were talking about concerned the building of a new railway, and I heard the word Amerikanski again and again in the discussion. Plans have been made to connect Belgrade, the capital, with Cattaro on the Adriatic. The length of the trunk line will be about 380 miles, but other projects connected with the scheme will bring the total to more than 1,300 miles, and it will take some years to complete the project. A concession for these roads has been given an American syndicate. which has engaged to lend Yugoslavia the sum of $100 million for these and other improvements, and as usual in such cases, the arrangement is the subject of almost continual discussion. The new railway is important to the country politically and economically. At present, Yugoslavia has no rail outlet to the sea entirely within her own territory. Her trunk lines were all built with a view to benefiting Austria and Hungary rather than Serbia. One road starts at Fiume, which is Italian, and another at Trieste, also a seaport of Italy, while a third, which gives Yugoslavia egress to the Mediterranean at Salonika, runs for about 55 miles through Greece. The road will be all Yugoslavian. The main line will start at one of the finest harbors of the Adriatic and wind over the mountains, following the valleys of two rivers, the Drina and Save, on the way to Belgrade. It will cross the mountains at an altitude of about 3,000 feet. Branch lines will be built north and south, and it is intended to bridge the Danube at Belgrade and extend the railway through the rich Banat grain section to connect with the Romanian system. At Belgrade, the line will join the trunk railway from Paris to Constantinople. Another possibility is the extension of a branch line from Cattaro across southern Serbia to Bulgaria and on into South Russia. This was a part of a plan originated by the Russians long before the World War. No wonder the Yugoslavs are interested in these railway projects. They mean the binding of their nation into a political unit and the consequent reduction of the army through greater facilities for moving troops quickly. But, more important still, these railroads are essential to the economic development of the kingdom, which in grain, minerals, and other resources is one of the richest of all the states of Central Europe. End of chapter 21.